back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor. Now it's time for your weekend tech tip, brought to you by Chevy Silverado.
Now, this week's Chevy Silverado tech tip of the week is one of my favorite ways. And I'll admit, one of the ways that I don't spend as much time fishing as I'd like, but is one of my favorite ways to go after steelhead, salmon, trout, for crying out loud, depending on the system that you're in. It's just deadly effective, very, very efficient, right? You can break down different parts of the river that you might not be able to bobber dog through or drift fish through or throw a spinner through, swing anything through kind of a scenario. Deep water, shallow water. It can also be a secondary technique to if you've already gone through a section and you've bobber dogged it, bobber and jig, drift fished it, done a number of different things, but nothing, and you just feel, because if you've done this long enough, you're going to have a feeling sometimes that it just feels fishy, right? And you want to go back through there. Well, the way to really do that to where if you didn't get those fish initially is back trolling, okay? There's a lot of different things to consider when you're back trolling, and we're going to eliminate some of those when you're talking about gear. Right now, different situations, different rivers are going to have different types of water that you're going to back troll in. So what we're going to talk about is what you would be back trolling with, okay? First thing I'll say is we're going to talk about plugs, and then we're going to talk about diver and bait. All right, now I'll give the disclaimer for diver and bait when I get to that point, but this setup that I'm going to show you is for back trolling a plug. There's 100 different versions that are out there. The mag lips are extremely popular for a reason. Brad's Wigglers, extremely popular for a reason. The KF13, the smaller killer fish, is an excellent plug to back troll for even steelhead, but of course spring Chinook. And you might change things up depending on the fish that you're after. If you're going after Chinook, you know, you might want to bump up the size of gear that I'm going to be showing you right now. This is going to be kind of leaning towards steelhead in particular, but it's all the same thing, right? Now, are you going to use this same rod to target Chinook? Probably not a great idea, right? It's a steelhead rod. It is not intended for 20-pound springers in a small river. Would it work? Probably, but there's other options. But this is the basic setup for pulling a plug that I love, that works excellent. Now, there's a number of things that you can change. The one thing I would say that most people don't do is use a mono line. Now, I will say that on your reel, monofilament when you're back trolling is not something that I typically use. I like a 30-pound or even a 20-pound braided line, in particular the TCB, the Braid 8 from P-Line. I just love this stuff. It's not too thick of a diameter to run a 30-pound. I just like the fact that it is thin enough, and when it's on that main line and when it's on the reel, it doesn't change how the plug itself is down there working, or diver when we get to that. It's just the perfect scenario, right? Now, you could actually bump that up to a 50-pound and still not see any negative effects from having that line on there when you're back trolling for steelhead. So just keep that in mind. I really like the braided line. Now, that falls down to the fact, though, that you better have a rod that can handle it, right? Now, if you're going to run braided line, you can, or excuse me, monofilament line, you can get away with a little bit stiffer of a rod than, say, if you're going to be using the braided line. The braided line, you want to have a nice soft rod, a nice soft tip that'll let that plug do its work. There's a lot of thoughts that are out there, but again, I'm a braided guy. If you're going to run mono, you know, you can get away with a little bit stiffer of a rod because you got that flex out there. So that being said, I like a line counter reel. This just happens to be the Abu Garcia, the Toro, or excuse me, the Max DLC, not the Toro version. It's a smaller version. Digital line counter. You want that digital line counter or a line counter to get your gear to the same spot, right? Meaning that if you had 2 rods, 3 rods, whatever it is, that they're all that same distance so that you got that wall of plugs coming down on them in an even setup. You don't want one plug getting by them and then letting that fish slip through without running into another one of your plugs, because that's a lot of how a plug will actually work, is you're forcing them to bite. You're moving them down. They finally get frustrated enough with this thing wiggling in their face. They go right, and there's another one, and they just whack it. And that's one of the reasons why we all love it, is because it is a pretty impressive bite when you get bit on a plug. And if you've done it before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But here's the rigging, okay? What I've got here, and any number of versions of rods will work, but this one just in particular, this is the 7111 from Edge. This rod was actually designed for hover fishing. Now, they actually make rods that are specifically designed for pulling plugs, diver and bait for steelhead. But this bend, and I'm going to try to give it for you the best as I can here. So Danielle, don't worry, I'll figure this one out. It's all in the front, right? That bend in the rod, and that's what you're going to be looking for, is going to be all in the front, right? So that plug has the opportunity to work, right? You want that rod to be soft enough up front to where it's going to let that plug do its job, but also have enough backbone that when the fish does bite, it's going to get the hooks. It's super important, right? You don't want a rod that's just a stick that doesn't allow that plug to move. You want a rod tip that's going to be soft enough to let that plug do its job, which is just to work side to side and not be impeded by the line or the rod itself. Okay, so that's super, super, super important. Now, let's take a look at what I think is very easy. I think a lot of us, or a lot of folks can overthink this, and some of them might even underthink it. This is just a simple 6-bead bead chain. This is just a brad stainless steel bead chain. Also, it's got 3 8mm beads on here. Okay. Now, the beads that I have on here aren't necessary, but I'll explain why I have 3 of them. You can use one, right, just to help keep grass and leaves and stuff off of your swivel. In this particular case, a 6-bead bead chain. Or I like setting my rigs up so that I can swap out from plug fishing to diver and bait fishing. I'll get to that in just a second. So it's just main line to your 6-bead bead chain, 3 8mm beads on there, and then of course your leader, which in this case is a 15-pound, which I like when I'm pulling plugs, 15-pound fluorocarbon. This is the Shinsi from P-Line, and then to your favorite plug. So we're going to switch to our Kershaw Tech Cam and give you a different idea of using the same setup, right? The three 8mm beads, the 6-bead bead chain, and we're going to tie together why I actually use or put these beads on there. Now, like I said earlier, you can use a single bead, right? And that'll help keep trash, grass, whatever, leaves off of your 6-bead bead chain here. And you could actually end up doing what I like to do to run diver and bait. But I like 3, okay? There's your 3 beads, and here's my diver. This is the standard size Brad's diver, old school style of diver that's been around for a very long time. The original name was a Hottentot. Anyway, so here's the standard size. I put it on about a 6 or 7 inch dropper. You can change that. You can shorten it for if you're in shallow, clear water, right? You want to keep it down closer to the bottom, or you can lengthen it for a little bit deeper water, a little bit faster water, just to kind of change things up and get that bait into right into the strike zone. But here's why I got those beads on there, right? I like to take just a regular old snap swivel on the end of my dropper for my diver, and I clip it right onto my main line. And then it runs right to those 3 bead chains, or excuse me, 3 bead chains, the 3 8mm beads, and it sits right on there, and there's your diver. I always have it on a slider. I don't like tying off to the bottom of the diver. There are times where you can certainly do that, but I absolutely run a dropper on my diver at all times. And the only thing I do is, again, I will change up that dropper length, okay? But there's a reason why that works so well with that bead chain and the 3 beads with that. It just gives that little bit of an extra gap so it doesn't get tangled up. And then I'm just going to give you a real quick, easy one here. Oh, back to the diver. That's the standard size Brad's diver. I would prefer, and I use 99% of the time, is the Magnum diver, because it'll do everything that you want it to do. It'll dive 3 feet, sure. It'll dive 15 feet, where this one won't. So there are some advantages to that, so you can kind of play with it. They have different colors. But here's a very standard mooching rig that I tie up for running sand shrimp. Sand shrimp is my favorite bait to run behind a diver and bait, as a diver and bait setup. So it's just a very basic setup. 2 size 2s are all you need. But there you go. That just gives you a quick idea on how you can switch up that plug rod where you can have it ready to go for plugs. But if you want to make a quick change to diver and bait, you just clip on your Brad's Magnum diver or standard diver, clip it on with a little dropper on there, swap it out to your mooching rig, whatever you might want to have in front of it, spin and glow, whatever, to a sand shrimp in situations, of course, where there's not a bunch of wild fish running around, can be a very, very deadly way to target steelhead. So there you go. Hopefully that helps out in some way. So stick with us. We got more when we come back from this break. Don't go anywhere.